Hello, and welcome back to our podcast, Mujeres por Mujeres for Ella Adelante. My name is Maria Fernandez. I'm the executive director, and with me today I have.
Vicky Frausto, I'm the Director of Operations for Ella and Ella Adelante.
It's great to be back and talking about a new topic that most people would never consider talking about, and that is the Port of Sunnyside. So we've been canvassing quite a bit lately because we are in election season, and this election season we have a very important position that's up, and that is a commissioner seat for the Port of Sunnyside, and that is District 1. And when we've gone canvassing several times, I don't think that I've run into one person who understood what a port does. What is the role of a port within this area, the city, right? So we thought we should take a moment to talk about what a port does and just provide information, just basic information about what a port is responsible for doing. And so let's talk about that today because it's really important. It is on your ballot right now. You all should have received ballots by now. And we've noticed that the trend in port voting is that there's a lot of undervotes because people don't really understand, not only because most of the incumbents that are sitting there in port right now mostly have run unopposed.
Yeah.
Like the incumbent right now has run unopposed for his seat for like 20 years, right? So people are not voting for that position probably because they don't understand what that person is doing within that role within the Port Commission. So we thought we should probably talk about these candidates and what the port does.
Absolutely. So we have some questions that are going to guide a little bit of our conversation. Why the ports are so important, like you said, thoughts around and about the Sunnyside port, and why the community should be more interested in what the port does, and its impact to Sunnyside and the residents. So let's go ahead and start off with, why are ports so important?
Ports are critical. If your area happens to have a port, they're critical because it is basically the economic engine for your city, right? And so ports are really responsible for developing the economy. And so when you're talking about like retail, commercial, you're talking about manufacturing, over here, the most prominent industries that are present here are the dairy industry, the ag industry. It is the port that helps to drive industries here in our area. And we have what's considered a dry port because most people, when you think about a port, you're thinking of like Seattle. You're thinking about like docks, right? You're near a body of water, and it's about logistics and transportation, including through waterways, right? Well, that's very different here because the waterway that we're closest to is the Yakima River, but that is not a transportation system that is being used for transportation here to the Sunnyside area. So we're considered a dry port, an inland port in our area. And so ports are so important because what that translates to is jobs, right? It's jobs. And so we really need to talk about what kind of jobs are being developed through the industries that this port of Sunnyside concentrates on developing. I think there's a lot of room for conversation around what kind of job creation is possible through the port's efforts in bringing industry. And so let's talk about some of their current projects with the Port of Sunnyside. Right now, we know from what's been publicized that we have a new Apple warehouse coming into the area. It's already underway. They broke ground quite a while ago. I'm sure they're going to have a ribbon cutting here probably within the next couple of months. They've also proposed the biodigester, a methane gas plant for the area in the port industrial complex that they have over by Alexander, right by Dairygold, right? So those are the two big projects. They have many other projects, but those are the ones that are coming up. Right now, they're also working on another project, and that is to upgrade and provide infrastructure, develop infrastructure around their industrial park, right? And so just recently, they had a ribbon cutting for the new street that they laid out around that area. So the port it's the economic engine here. it provides jobs, it brings in industries, it attracts industries. The other thing that a port will typically do is help to develop the workforce, right? In order to bring in or attract industries, you have to have a specific type of workforce ready for that industry to be here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have like tech industry here in Lower Valley, in Sunnyside, and we're not attracting that industry because we don't have the workforce that's trained necessarily for that industry. So the major concentration of our port here has been in ag and dairies, and we have a huge labor force ready to take on
Mm-hmm.
those particular industries, right? So what we've been saying is that I think it's time to diversify the industries that this area attracts. But in order to do that, you have to prepare the workforce for that. I've had discussions with the previous executive director, and we've talked about diversification of industry and why that hasn't happened. And the answer that he responded with was, we don't have the workforce. So my question then was, what has the port or the city of Sunnyside, or mutually collaboratively, done to prepare a workforce to attract new industries? Well, not very much, right? So we need to deal with this issue. I think that we need to think about, what is the history of Sunnyside's port here in this area?
So, what are your thoughts about the Sunnyside Port's history
Mhm.
in this area?
So I've had, a few years to study what the port is doing, what it is not doing here in Sunnyside. And I think that it's actually quite problematic, the gaps that exist between the Port of Sunnyside, our local colleges, trade colleges, in terms of like developing our workforce, their collaboration and working with the city, with the school district. Most of Sunnyside is operating as an island. Like the port operates mostly in a bubble. The city does as well. And so does the school district. There's very little crossover collaboration between these three jurisdictions that are critically important to the health and vibrancy, or lack thereof, the city and its residents, right? We have been talking now forever about, how the city, with all of the complaints around like youth delinquency and families not being as responsive to the way that they're caring for their children. In other words, let's blame families for what's ailing the city. When what we've been saying is, what hasn't been happening is these cross collaborations between these three jurisdictions, right? To deal with what is causing all of these different issues, whether it's crime, violence, whether it's poverty, mental health issues, gang affiliation, all of that stuff, right? Like these jurisdictions are just not collaborating with one another to address these issues, because so much of it is rooted in poverty. And what I've always said, and I'll continue to say, is that it is the leadership that is responsible for creating the conditions for those things to be bred out of it, right? So I think the issues that I have in having observed the port over the last couple of years, and going to their meetings, by the way, so I can understand what their current initiatives are and how they operate. And I think my biggest concern with the port is the lack of transparency with the port. The port, let me give you an example of what that looks like. And it's really, to me, a very egregious one, because the public deserves to know what the port is doing. Okay. So the lack of transparency, let's take the biodigester project. And I don't have a full opinion on the biodigester project just yet, because we don't have an environmental impact study that has come out of that project. It hasn't been provided to the community. So I don't specifically know, other than having studied other biodigesters, to see what environmental impact it has had on those communities. And it can be a mixed bag, because it's considered to be, green energy, and then it's considered to be, well, no, that's actually just greenwashing. It's not fully accurate. We've talked to some scientists that said, no, there are emissions that cumulatively, if it's being loaded on top of other pollutions, then it's actually really bad for the environment and for public health. So when this biodigester was proposed for the city of Sunnyside, via Pacific Ag, which is an Oregon corporation, the community around here didn't know anything about it. So it was, the port has to do its standard communications and notifications for this project happening, but it was done like through their website, maybe some obscure little announcement through the paper. Very, very little communication, and no communication in Spanish, because we know that there's a vast majority of folks here in our city, the residents, whose primary language spoken at home is Spanish, right?
Yeah.
We know that for a fact.
Yeah.
And so no communication was provided in Spanish. And so we provided a forum and an opportunity for Pacific Ag to come into the community and explain exactly what this project was and what it meant to the community. So, that was an issue. The fact, and we brought it up with the port, we brought it up with the city of Sunnyside, that there is a lack of transparency around this project. People deserve to understand what the impact is going to be, because it could literally be their neighbor. It's going to be their neighbor. Residents live all around the port district. And so we know that a couple of years ago, Nutrient Ag had an explosion in that area. We're putting a biomethane gas plant next to a facility that has already had an issue of an explosion at one point. So it is in the best interest of the community to understand what is like a worst case scenario with this sort of facility there. And I'm not saying that it's not going to bring in jobs, that it can't be something that could possibly be really good for the community. What I'm saying is that the port and the city together have not provided the information that we need in order to make a full informed decision about whether this is good or bad for the community. So that is one of the issues that I have with the port is lack of transparency. Two, in regard to the lack of transparency, is also that their meetings, with the city council meetings, they're provided on Zoom. With a school district, you can catch that meeting on Zoom. So if you can't make it in person to their public meeting, their required, regularly scheduled public meeting, then you should be able to catch it on Zoom, right? Most jurisdictions have gone virtually since the pandemic, so that people could participate in those meetings, or at least just become aware of what's happening. The port to this day still refuses to provide a virtual meeting for its public. So again, it continues to want to operate in the dark. And that's what we've been saying since, 2023, that the port operates in the dark and it's not providing information about what it's doing.
Yeah. Are their websites translated, and are emails located on their website?
So I find it interesting. I remember wanting to get a hold of one of the commissioners just last year, and even their emails and phone numbers are not provided. So there's no way of getting hold of Arnold Martin or the other two commissioners to ask any questions. Like, you have to go through the executive director in order to try and communicate with one of the commissioners for them to get back to you. So that again is just another example of the lack of transparency and the inability to communicate with
elected officials.
For elected officials. So I find that to be highly problematic.
Yeah. Well, that's all really great information. How do we connect this to getting our residents to understand why they should be interested in what the port does and what it offers them? What is it to the residents? Like, why should they know and be on the lookout for more information, and also be on the lookout on who is going to be appearing on their ballots?
Right. This is why it's so important for the port to be on the radar of every voter in Sunnyside and every resident in Sunnyside, because the port produces something tangible. And in the most tangible way, they spur economic development. And that translates, again, to jobs. And that is what is so desperately needed in this area. And we're talking about, just, a few months coming out of two dairies, or within this last year, two dairies closing down their operations because they were non-compliant with the consent decree with the Environmental Protection Agency. So we had about 170 workers that were laid off from their jobs. Where are they going to next, right, for their jobs? Well, the port is one of because it's an economic engine for our city, it has the ability to create tangible jobs for our area. But the issue becomes, what kind of jobs are those, right? So like I said, what they've been able to concentrate over the last few decades has been mostly around the dairy and ag industry. And again, those two industries are economic drivers for this community. But one of the things that we know firsthand for ourselves, because a lot of our families grew up in these industries as well, working in these industries, and you're getting typically paid minimum wage. So we're talking about families who have to work two jobs just to try and make ends meet. Most of our farm workers working in the ag industry are barely making over minimum wage, and probably not even getting benefits, right? There's another, social moral issue in that as well. If you're going to be exposed and working within one of the most dangerous industries, the ag industry, because of exposure to chemicals and pesticides, possibility of falling off ladders or platforms, there's all kinds of occasions to that accidents can happen. And yet these folks, our farm workers, do not have access to healthcare, right? And so, the question that residents should be asking, or voters should be asking, is what kinds of jobs is the port bringing in? Because we're talking about an entity here, a jurisdiction here that has access to millions of dollars, right? Millions of dollars. And not only do they have access to millions of dollars, they have access to collaborations with other entities that provide millions of dollars. For instance, they have worked very consistently with the Department of Commerce, with the Washington State Department of Commerce, with Yakima County Supporting Investment and Economic Development Program. And so this is the board that reviews applications to making funding recommendations to the Yakima County commissioners, right? And so we're talking about access to, millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars for infrastructure development. Let me give you an example, one that you all will recognize. Everybody knows about varietals. Everybody knows about Hoptown. Everybody knows about Codin. The Port of Sunnyside helped to renovate or construct these different facilities, and they lease out these buildings to these business owners, right? We know that varietals is incredibly popular. It's successful. And that was brought on with the help of the Port of Sunnyside. So those, again, what an investment to be able to make, right, within your city. This is the kind of tangible resource that is brought to the city of Sunnyside through the Port of Sunnyside. So people need to be interested in what the port is doing.
Perry Tech, I think they just brought forth the construction program through Perry as well.
That's right. And so that just started, I believe it might have been last year that they started that program with Perry Technical Institute. And that's an important trade school, right, that trains our emerging workforce. And that more of that kind of collaboration needs to happen. So, but what we need are leaders that think more broadly, more innovatively, more creatively about attracting new industry, about attracting more programs that have to deal with workforce training and development. These are incredibly important. This is why this needs to be on the radar of every single voter. The port can no longer operate in the cover of night. Like the port has to be brought out into the community so the community understands what the port does. And so the port is accountable to the community. There are so many desires here to see, my goodness, like how many years have we been talking about the need for like a soccer complex here? That is a project that is typically taken on by port districts. The Mattawa Port District just recently, within the last 5 years, developed a soccer complex out in Mattawa. That was the port district. These are the possibilities that are brought by a port district, right? So we're not talking about just job creation. We're talking about recreation and tourism. These are important topics. These are important, tangible things that can be brought to help Sunnyside and its residents thrive in this community. And so we're needing all our folks here in Sunnyside to understand how important a port is and how important it is to vote in the right leadership. The incumbent has been there for 20 years, and we've kind of gotten just about the same thing for the last 20 years. If you want creativity, innovation, the attraction of a wider, broad network of industries, and developing consciously and deliberately a more upskilled workforce, that has access to better opportunities for better jobs that pay family living wages with benefits, then you need to have new leadership in these positions. And so, it's no secret that our endorsed candidate is Teodora Martinez. And she may not have 20 years of experience in the Port District, but I'll tell you what, she is an impacted resident who has lived with some of the consequences of the port's investments, right? And I'm talking about her living in the area of Outlook and dealing with issues like polluted air and contaminated water. It is time to reverse all of the harms that have been, committed by some of these industries, addressing those directly and head on, and making people responsible for those things. But again, going back to having the kind of leadership that is willing to step in and say it's time to do things differently so that our folks have more of a life to live that is abundant and healthy and positive. And so people aren't struggling all the time. And that's what we see so much of with our families. And the port is one area, one jurisdiction that can absolutely do way more than it's done in decades. And so our recommendation, our encouragement for voters today is that you get out there and you vote for Teodora Martinez, who is just itching to bring creativity and innovation to the Port of Commissioners and to really just stretch the boundaries of what they've typically done. So thank you very much for listening. If you have questions about the port, please feel free to contact me with Ella Adelante. Message us on our social media pages. We are not far from you at all, and we would love to have these conversations with you. But please, by November 4th, vote. Get your ballot in, please, and vote for Teodora Martinez because we need new leadership in the Port District for Sunnyside.
Thank you so much, Maria, for this recap of the port, why it's important, and why people should get a lot more interested in the functionalities of this institution that is meant to work for them. And right now, we feel like it's not just living up to that just yet, but we have hope, and I think hope is the last thing to go. And we invite new innovation, and we hope that through your votes, we can definitely invite that in and start seeing a more different environment here in Sunnyside that will begin working for our families.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you the next time around on Mujeres por Mujeres with Ella Adelante.
Thank you.
Thank you.